What's up guys, it's Eric from Late to the Game Outdoors talking today about arrows. And arrow selection and arrow spine and all those good things. I am coming at you live from my garage in July, where it's supposed to be, I think, like 112 today. So I'm going to be positively dripping with sweat by the end of this video. Please excuse any stains that show up on my shirt. Arrows are a complicated little thing. It seems like it should be simple, like it's just a straight stick with a point that you shoot from your bow, but there is so much nerdery baked into choosing the right arrow, and all of it changes based on your setup. So what works really well for me isn't necessarily going to work really well for you, but today I want to just talk through some of the basics of arrow selection and point you towards some tools that can help you not only choose the right arrow ahead of time, so you're not just dropping money down the toilet buying arrow after arrow, searching for the holy grail of arrows, but also just how for relatively little bit of money, you can set up your own arrows at home in your garage rather than heading down to the bow shop every time you need a new box or need to try some different type of arrow. Because I love my bow shop and trust those guys, but it's like 30 miles from my house. And that's a long round trip if you shoot a few arrows that you don't like and need to go back and try something different. So real quick, the basics of arrow construction and what you need to be concerned with will largely come down to weight and spine. The spine is the stiffness of the arrow, and it's measured by like complicated stuff we don't need to get into, but basically the lower the number, the stiffer the arrow. Now your arrow needs to flex a little bit coming out of the bow, and it will because there's a weight on the end of it in your tip, whether field point, broadhead, doesn't matter. It is heavier up front. And so as that bow is propelled from the back, while the momentum's trying to build, it's basically pushing against this weight, and it causes your arrow to flex a little bit, which is great, it's fine, you need that. But too much flex, and it takes a long time while your arrow, if you ever watch slow motion video of an arrow in flight, it's kind of bending and flexing those first few yards, and then eventually it catches up with the momentum and flies straight into your target. In general, a stiffer arrow is going to recover quicker. So it still flexes, but it flexes less, and so it sooner gets to that point where inertia takes over and it's flying hopefully straight at your intended target. Fletchings obviously play a role in helping stabilize out of the back end of your arrow, but in general, your arrow spine determines how much it'll flex and how quickly it will recover. Now, a lot of what the right spine is depends on your draw length, your draw poundage, how fast your bow is shooting, essentially. So if you are at a low poundage, short draw length, you're going to need a weaker spine just to get things going. In general, that's going to be a slightly lighter arrow, and it's you need that flex. If you're a long-limbed guy pulling a heavy bow, you can get away with a much stiffer spine, but again, what's right for me isn't necessarily what's right for you. So one tool that has proven worth its weight in gold to me is a little website online software thing called Archer's Advantage. If you've never heard of it, I hadn't either until I really started digging into the research of this stuff. But it's amazing. It costs $12 a year, which if it saves you from buying one high-end arrow that you don't need, it's already paid for itself. So you sign up and then you enter all the info about your bow and your setup. They have a long library of, unless you're shooting some custom-built bow you made in your house, in which case you're not watching this video because you already know way more than I do. You can just pick your bow out of the menu, your draw length, your poundage, all that stuff, and it calculates roughly how fast your arrow should be coming out. And once you've calculated that, you can head over to the shaft selector page, and it will just tell you what's wrong with your arrow. Essentially, as best that they can tell using math and science and wizardry. It will point you to the right shaft and actually a whole list of properly spined arrow shafts that you can choose from, factoring in what weight of head you're shooting, how heavy the insert in your arrow is, your nock weight, your fletching weight. The length of your arrow, which obviously affects the flex, because the longer the arrow, the more it will flex, even on a stiffer spine. It calculates all of that and then kind of gives you this handy little chart graph to show if you're in the sweet spot of arrow stiffness for your particular setup. So with that information, especially if you start playing around with this and you're looking at a long list of potential arrows that would be best for your setup, you don't want to be heading down to the bow shop every other day having them set up a couple new arrows for you. So I did a little digging as well into how to set up arrows, and it's remarkably simple. Now, fair warning, I happened to find a deal on the arrows that were at the top of my preferred list that were pre-fletched. So I did not invest in a fletching jig. There are other videos that can walk you through that if you need it. Although I have used in the past the little quick fletch things that Boning makes, and Boning? I don't know. Sorry if I messed up your name and made it accidentally sound kind of dirty. Anyway, the quick fletch, it's amazing and holds up really well. It's been years since I put these on, but this arrow is years old. It's been shot hundreds of times, and this quick fletch is still just locked on, no tears. It's amazing. You basically slide this little sticker on, dip it in a pot of boiling water, and it shrink wraps itself to your arrow shaft, and there you go. You don't get to customize things like twist and spin, and you're stuck with, you know, the standard kind of 2-inch blazers. But if you're okay with that, and you're okay with factoring in a couple extra grains on the backside for this, it's a real simple, easy way to fletch your arrows, though it's not the most cost-effective way in the long run. Okay, so you've got your new arrow that you desperately want to try. It comes in, you know, a 31, 32-inch, just unfinished length. How do you get this thing set up so you can shoot it out of your bow safely and so that it will last a good long time? I'm glad you asked. Super simple, couple basic tools you're gonna need. Okay, to build your own arrows, you will need arrows. I know. A saw of some sort. Now, I went with the super budget-friendly option, which is this little mini 2-inch cutoff saw from Harbor Freight. I know what you're gonna say. I've had plenty of Harbor Freight tools, and yes, half of them have failed me prematurely, but the other half are still in use to this day, so I was willing to roll the dice with $30 with a coupon versus $150 for an official arrow saw from an archery supplier. If it fails, I could replace it and still have spent less than half of that fancy arrow cutter. You'll also need a file to just knock down any rough edges after cutting. You'll need a Q-tip and some sort of cleaner, and you'll need some insert cement. I went with the insert iron from Boning, just because it has a great reputation, and so far it has earned that reputation. It's holding up great. First step, we're going to mark where we want to cut based on an existing arrow we've been shooting. Lock it in place. Check that it looks square and is right where we want to be. And then just cut right down. The one thing I will say that I noticed on the very first arrow I cut is to not force this thing down through quickly. It's not a 2x4 on a chop saw to just, as the saying goes, let the blade do the work. Just gently apply pressure and let it slowly make its way through your arrow in the carbon. Then take your little file, just knock down the few little edges that are hanging out there. And I know there are arrow squaring tools that do a much better job of this, but I just kind of like to eyeball my square. And this is where you clean the inside. You can use whatever cleaner you want. Most people recommend acetone or rubbing alcohol or something. I didn't have any of that on hand, so as you can see, I'm using carb and choke cleaner, which works just fine. But you just want something that can get all this dust out of the middle and will evaporate really quickly. Gross. This stuff stuck in your arrow shaft is what all your cement will glue to, and then it will knock loose real easily. So next up, insert cement. It recommends 1 to 2 drops on each side of the insert. So because I like to err on the more side, I go with 2 small drops on one side, rotate it over, 2 small drops on the other side. And then as you insert it, you just need to twist. So put it in there and then twist the arrow as it goes down just to spread that glue over the insert. Need a little rag, wipe up the excess. That scooshes out. And yes, scoosh is an official technical word. Best if you drop your box of arrows on the floor. I like to just press down, make sure it's nice and seated. And boom. Done, ready to go. You just have to let it dry for at least 24 hours. So the process really is that simple and easy. Again, if you get absolute bare shafts, you'll need to fletch these, which you can look up how to do that. If you buy a basic fletching jig, they range from 30 bucks all the way up to like 150 bucks. But in the long run, if you plan to really get into this and do a lot of these, that's going to be much more economical than buying a 6-pack of the Easy Fletch every time you want to fletch some arrows, because that's going to get pricey. Anyway, in case you're curious, the new arrows I've been shooting are the Black Eagle arrows. They're Carnivore series. It's a 6mm shaft, 250 spine. Comes in a couple different straightness tolerances depending on your budget, but a remarkably budget-friendly arrow. I got a whole dozen of them for right at about 100 bucks, which is not bad if you've been pricing arrows lately. And so far they've held up beautifully. I have stacked a couple on top of each other. I was messing around with bare shaft tuning this little guy, and my bow was out of tune. So he spent a few times skipping through the desert, but is still just rock solid, no cracks, hanging in there. So been super impressed so far. But at the end of the day, you need to shoot a setup that works best for you. So if your archery is dialed right now, don't go looking for stuff to mess around with. But if you're chasing your tail with tuning and issues and flyers and you can't get your broadheads to cooperate and you've been to the bow shop a bunch of times and they keep tweaking stuff and telling you that the bow is set up great, maybe take a look at your arrows. It can be relatively inexpensive to buy a couple different spines, a couple different kinds, maybe try a heavier insert in one, just try a few things, spend 12 bucks and play around with Archer's Advantage to get you in the ballpark. But I think it's an overlooked part of our archery setup sometimes. And a lot of times we just shoot the same thing we've always shot because it's what's comfortable, but it's definitely worth looking into. So I'm gonna cut up a few more of these so that they have time to dry and I can start really dialing in my pins now that I finally have my bow and my arrow set up, flying straight and stacking exactly where I want them. Guys, as always, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and hit the little bell thing. If you want to check out some other how-to stuff, there's a link coming up. If you just want to watch a decent hunt, I'll throw a video like that right over here. And as always, appreciate you. Get out there, stay safe, have fun. It's supposed to be fun. But fall seasons are approaching, so make sure you and your gear are dialed and ready because that's what the animals deserve. Thanks, guys.